So this session is about our process at the Highlander Institute in developing an evidence base for culturally responsive and sustaining instruction. And the wonderful folks at Aurora have shared the slides in the chat box. So you can click on that link and it'll allow you to follow along. So I'll give you all a moment to get into the slide deck. And of course, if you feel more comfortable just following along with me, that is wonderful as well. So my name is Malika Ali. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at the Highlander Institute. We are an organization that's based in Providence, Rhode Island, and we partner with schools and districts around the country, mostly in the New England area, New York, a few schools in and around Chicago, Iowa, Texas, and our work is really centered on making schools more equitable, relevant, and effective. And so we research, we convene, we coach, and we build capacity to improve experiences and outcomes for all kids, and in particular by centering students from marginalized communities. So our vision is that we are bringing together and facilitating rich conversations that are data-driven and asset-based alongside students, educators, and communities to design classrooms that are empowering of all students, schools that are adaptive and resilient, and systems ultimately that are liberatory for all of us. So I want to start with the definition of sort of what do we want to, when I say we want classrooms that are empowering of all kids, like what does that mean for us? So I'll share this definition. I'll share the theory of change for how we're hoping to get there, the framework that is rooted in culturally responsive and sustaining pedagogy and learning science, and then I'll share a little bit about the intentions of the research base that we developed, why we developed it, and what we hope to do with it. And then I invite you all to do a little bit of exploration, and then to kind of come back and talk about what that means for you. And then we'll share a little bit about the implications for our work. And then hopefully you all can kind of think about and start to talk about the implications that this could have for your work as well. So to start, when we talk about culturally responsive and sustaining pedagogy, we are drawing on the incredible work of Geneva Gay and Gloria Ladson-Billings and Django Paris and Sami Alam and so many others, along with the work around academic mindset that came out of the Chicago Consortium and the work from Project Zero at Harvard around scaffolding and developing thinking skills. And we brought a lot of this research together to really put a stake in the ground around a theory for how we can, in a process-oriented way, support students to ultimately transform their own lives, their communities, and society, and be successful at school and in whatever ways that they define success from this definition. So for us, it is about leveraging the cultural and linguistic practices of diverse learners, not only to make learning more effective and relevant for students, but also to foster and sustain cultural pluralism. Ultimately, the purpose is social transformation. So you'll notice the first half of the definition kind of comes out of the work of Geneva Gay and Gloria Ladson-Billings, and the second half of it uses some of the language from Django Paris and Sami Alam, who wrote the book Culturally Sustaining Pedagogies. And so you'll see what that looks like and means for us in this slide. There are 4 domains of our framework. It starts with awareness. We move into community building, and then cognitive development, and then critical consciousness. And I'll share a little bit about what we mean by each one. It's intentionally circular or spiral in this way because all of these domains are interconnected. And we believe there is a process orientation. So we intentionally start by building awareness. And that is awareness both of the sociocultural context. So it's important first that the educators and school leaders that we work with are able to recognize and understand how we're operating within a system that is doing exactly what it's designed to do, right? How do these systems, these inequitable systems, translate into our classrooms and schools? We have to build our awareness about that. You know, who is school working for? Who is it not working for? We bring together design teams that are inclusive of students and family members and educators of all sorts, school and district administrators, community members, and we really explore data together to kind of try to understand that. And then our professional development and coaching, we do that alongside teachers in PLC formats, one-on-one coaching and PDs. And it's important for us to understand from an asset-based lens also, you know, who are we working with? Like, who are our students? What are their strengths? What are their values? What are their priorities? What are their families and the community strengths and values and priorities? And then there's this aspect of awareness that is about awareness of who is actually carrying the cognitive load, who is doing the deep thinking and learning. And so we have to interrogate how those things are connected. How is who is in front of us informing the degree to which we are supporting students to engage in rigorous learning, to engage in productive struggle, to really be responsible for carrying the cognitive load, versus the sort of learned helplessness and sort of compliance-oriented teaching that yields dependent learners. And we see that a lot, where educators will over scaffold for students, and they are coming from a place of good intention of wanting to support kids, but ultimately has a detrimental effect. So we have to understand awareness first. Then the second domain is around community building. So this is about building a culture of trust and belonging, right? That means identity-safe classrooms. That means a classroom where it's not just about good classroom management, where kids are nice to each other and everyone gets along and it's a well-managed classroom. It's about building a classroom where when a student is under the load of a cognitive task, the whole community can support that learner through the task, right? So it's building a culture of trust and belonging and building a culture of thinking. And so we nurture that in ways that, again, require us to understand where kids are coming from in terms of their academic mindsets, in terms of the narratives that they hear about people like them, whether it's their identities, whether it's certain experiences that they have, certain aspects of their background, their educational background, their cultural background. How do those things inform how we develop our academic mindsets and our learner identities? We have to explicitly understand those things in order to develop positive academic mindsets. It's not just about saying, teaching kids that growth mindset is good, and that if you just add yet to the end of every sentence, I didn't pass my math exam yet, that doesn't go far enough. We really have to interrogate where some of these mindset issues are coming from, and then do the work of supporting students to craft counter narratives that are affirming of them and people who are like them. And so we build cultures of thinking that support kids to engage in productive struggle. And we do that in a way that it attends to the awareness that we built in this first domain. So these things intentionally fit together. Of course, community building is not something that's isolated to, one place. It's really a through line through everything that we do. And the reason we include that after the building of awareness is because it has to include the awareness building. And of course, they're all connected. When we do that, when we've built a culture of trust and belonging, we have identity-safe classrooms, our kids are engaged in productive struggle, they have positive learner identities, they believe that people who share their backgrounds and their identities are, come from rich academic traditions, rich intellectual traditions, that allows us to be more effective in developing their cognitive skills. So we're leveraging relationships, a mindset around equity and what we know from learning science to disrupt cultures of low expectations and to shift the cognitive load to students. We support our educators to look at data to figure out what transferable cognitive skills, thinking skills to really prioritize, and then help them understand how they can scaffold those skills, develop those skills, make them visible so that students can develop them and then it becomes second nature. Skills like problem solving, effective reasoning, decision making, perspective taking. These are skills that ultimately empower kids, empower all of us to transform our own lives, to transform our communities, and to transform society. If I can solve problems, if I can reason effectively and tell you this is what I believe should be true, and here's why, and here's my evidence, and here are all the ways in which that's nuanced. If I can use those skills to make decisions, and if I can examine and explore multiple perspectives, and especially elevate perspectives that are non-dominant, right? Then that empowers our kids to do that work of social transformation, of building a culture that is pluralistic, starting from the classroom space in every single content area, in every single grade level. This is applicable. And that is where then we apply those skills in ways that are meaningful and relevant, so that our kids are thinking critically about the world. They are motivated to do something about the challenges that they see. They understand the levers of change that are available to them, and they are able to use their learning to take informed action, to act in ways that promote justice, that make the world better, starting with their own lives, with whatever is within their sphere of control, and then moving on beyond that to their communities and to society. So that's a little bit of an overview of the framework. I want to zoom in on the components of our culturally responsive, comprehensive school change model. What I just shared with you was the centerpiece, which is what we want to be true in classrooms and schools. It is about instruction and curriculum that is culturally responsive, culturally relevant, sustaining. And then where we really want to focus today is around one aspect of how we think about research and impact and data, which is rooting ourselves in kind of this research base that is centering the communities that we work with. We won't speak a lot on the inclusive change piece, except for at the end when I share with you some of the impact data that's come out of this. But for this piece, it's really just sort of the important piece that I want to name is that it is communities that are doing this work together. So when I mention teachers or educators of all sorts, school and district administrators, families, community students who are coming together, they're looking at data together, they're identifying practices that come from our framework that will align to their vision. And that vision is aligned, of course, to the data at their school level. And then we build our professional learning out of that in a way that attends to the local context. So now we'll get into the research base. And there's a link here, and we can share this link in the chat box. And we're going to explore it a little bit together. So this is the site here. And this, when you click here, it'll take you to the framework. When you click here, it'll take you to the research base. And then when you scroll down, it gives you a little bit of background on kind of the problem that we see, the solution, our theory of change, and then kind of our why. So the problem is that our education system breeds compliance, right? That develops dependent learners. And the solution for us is a framework that's rooted in culturally responsive and sustaining pedagogy that brings the most powerful research-based teaching to support all students to realize the natural, incredible potential they already have. It's already within them, right? They have incredible assets. And we do that by centering students whose communities have been marginalized by systemic inequity, because it ultimately helps all kids. So I shared a little bit about the framework. Later on, I'll invite you to also explore some of our spotlights, which are within those 4 domains. We have a little bit of background on that domain, and then we have some teacher and student practices, and we're in the process of developing sort of these specific spotlights. So you click on a practice. So this practice is around developing sociocultural awareness, and it shares with you the what, the why, and the how. And this is meant to be sort of teacher friendly and really anybody friendly. So you can kind of explore some of that, and we'll have some time to explore that in a bit. So I'll kind of give the background, and then before I give you all an opportunity to do some exploration in some breakout rooms and some discussion, and record your thoughts, I'll invite you to ask any questions. So as they're coming up, definitely feel free to sort of document them, and we'll have some time to kind of ask questions in a bit. So what we'll do is I want to share with you the goals of the research. We're going to give this is going to be the exploration discussion piece, where you kind of go through a summary of the evidence base, and we'll sort of break off into groups and each take a different domain and explore some prompts around that, and then, you know, connect it to our practice and have a discussion about it, and then think about implications for all of us. So to start, you know, the goal of this research base was really to center communities that have been marginalized by systemic inequity in our research and our pedagogical approaches. So, you know, ultimately, what we noticed was so much of the research really centered white, native English speaking, kind of middle class students, and it can be really hard to find research that is that really connects to a lot of the communities that we work with that are predominantly Black and Brown and come from low income backgrounds. And many of our students in the schools that we work with are, you know, 30%, if not more, are multilingual learners. We, you know, across all of our contexts have significant populations of students who have IEPs and 504 plans. And so we really wanted to center these stories because, you know, in the 15 years that I've been working in schools, invariably you look at data together and you disaggregate it by different populations, and somebody will say, oh, well, that's to be expected. And so it always really bothered me that the stories that we tell about kids from communities like mine, and, you know, I grew up in a low-income household. My family are East African refugees who lived in Norman, Oklahoma. It's a very random place for people from my background. And I was a multilingual learner. At the time we called it ESL, as you probably know. And I felt the burden of all of the low expectations around me. And so every time, to this day, every time I hear that sort of, oh, of course, that's to be expected. Like, we expect that students with my profile will score lower, and we sort of excuse it with all these reasons. And sometimes in a pitying way, which is, to me, one of the worst things that we can do. And so what we wanted to do is gather this research base that does the opposite, that shows and highlights the incredible stories where we see great outcomes coming out of work that centers, you know, BIPOC communities, low-income communities, students who are multilingual learners, and shows how powerful these practices can be when you center those communities in an asset-based way. And that really is what drives our the work we do with our communities. So for us, we believe that if we start there, if we start by centering communities in an asset-based way in the research, we use that to really build our practice, our pedagogical practice, then we'll start to see those outcomes, those positive outcomes for our kids. The second piece was really around codifying those practices so it's usable for anybody who wants to use it. Right? How are we improving students' outcomes and experiences? What does the research actually say on that? And then we want to be able to share those research-based strategies in those spotlights that I mentioned that affirm our communities in an asset-based way, that acknowledges their funds of knowledge and that leverages them as strengths. Let me pause because in the next part, we'll be able to actually do some exploration in breakout rooms, but I've been talking for a minute. So let me pause, see if there are any thoughts or questions. You can unmute if you feel comfortable. You can pop it into the chat box, or you can hold on to it if you feel like, you know, exploring it in the breakout instead and then bringing it into the share out afterwards. So I'll give you a moment to collect your thoughts, to compile any questions, either out loud or in the chat box, and then we'll continue. Thank you, Joy. I appreciate that very much. Okay, and you'll have an opportunity to talk to each other. So if there are questions and you don't want to ask them now, you'll have another opportunity. But I want to give you an opportunity to now explore. So the way that the summary kind of the evidence base really hits on these key pieces. So awareness, building identity safe classrooms, building community, building academic mindsets, building cognitive skills, and developing critical consciousness. So what we'll do is the link is also in the deck again to kind of where you can explore, but it'll be in the Padlet where you all will have a little discussion. The prompt is here. I want you to think about knowledge production and the power of knowledge production and its implications. When you think about who is producing knowledge, what is the knowledge that we're rooting our practice in? How does kind of what I've shared connect to what you already know and believe about leveraging research for culturally responsive and sustaining pedagogy? How does it extend your thinking? And what challenges and questions come up? So when you click here, it'll actually take you to, and we'll break off into some groups. This here is the research base, right? So the summary of the research base. So you'll click on it. And this summary breaks it down into each domain. And then I also have 2 spotlight examples that you can explore in your groups as well. You don't have to, you could look at both. You can just pick one to see what that looks like. I'm going to break us into 4 groups so that we can kind of chunk the 4 domains. And I'll invite each group to explore just that section. Some of you may already have looked through the research base, but what I'd love for you to do is, document your conversation here in the Padlet around these questions. How does what I shared, connect what you already know and believe? How does it extend your thinking? And what challenges or questions come up for you as you think about this? And you'll root it in kind of the domains that are in your group. There's a question in the chat box. Yes, I absolutely can share the slide deck one more time. It is in the deck. And then there's a question about like what I mean by knowledge production. I reflect quite often on when we, whatever it is that we do, whether I'm a teacher, and I was a high school science teacher, or whether I was a district administrator, or in my role now, I was an instructional coach. I was a director of pedagogy and the chief innovation officer for the institute now. In all of my roles, I always kind of think about in my practice, what is the knowledge that I'm rooting my practice in? And so there's so much power in the ability to produce knowledge. And so if our evidence base for what we do centers, kind of just dominant communities, that's going to inform then our practice. So there's a lot of power in the ability to produce knowledge. So what we tried to do with this research base is really center knowledge that's produced that is specific to BIPOC communities, that kind of highlights the really incredible work that can and an impact that can happen when we use these culturally responsive practices through the lens of this framework. So it's a good question about defining kind of knowledge production. So I'll pause to see if any other questions are coming up. Back everyone. I let the rooms go a little longer because it was such rich discussion and I didn't want to cut it off. And even as I hit the room, I definitely cut off some good conversation. So I would love to hear any reflections that came out of it before we transition to sort of the last piece, which is sharing a little bit of the impact data and some implications for us, and then turning back over to you to kind of reflect on what you have heard so far. But any reflections come out of your breakout discussions that anyone would like to share? And again, if you're comfortable, you can unmute. If you feel more comfortable using the chat box, you can use that as well.
Well, first of all, Malika, thank you for your session. This has been phenomenal. I've been using the framework to help design the plan for my organization moving forward in CSRP. Sorry, my voice is crazy. And I think that like in our discussion, what it made me think of is how far we've come as I don't even want to say like educational reform, I'll call it educational reform. You know, what we once thought was what students need, particularly around community building with like advisory, versus like where we are today and like what we've come to understand with the learning science that students need. And, you know, 15 years ago, the work that we were doing with advisories was cutting edge, right? And so just knowing that there's still like the marathon continues, and I'll just leave it at that.
The marathon continues, to quote Nipsey Hussle. Thank you for that. Any other reflections come out of your breakout discussions? Okay. John, yeah, like you unmuted.
This feels like the future of this field. And I think your session next year will have 200 people in
it. Thank you, Joy. I appreciate that. And we'll be in Palm Springs next year, I heard.
True.
I saw one more unmute, so I just want to honor that before we continue.
Yeah, I just want to share, just so much of this is good teaching, and historically has been good teaching and necessary teaching in oppressed communities. But I also think about the 21, 22-year-old coming out of a teacher prep program. Mm-hmm. And if they're not from the community where they teach and they haven't themselves had this experience, how much we need to invest in their development and how much support we need to give to them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Don't get me too excited about that, because that's an R&D side of our work that we're trying to get into in terms of like community educators, teacher prep, supporting. We have a project right now to support students who are in the education departments to go through a curriculum and also be substitute teachers to kind of both address the sub shortage and get them, culturally responsive training and put money in their pockets, right? Because student teaching is hard. And so absolutely 100% to that point. That's key. It's about supporting in-service educators as we're doing this work, and pre-service educators to really be trained for that. So thank you for that point. And long-time educators as well. Yes, as Joy put in the chat box. So let me share a little bit about the impact that this has had, because often some of the pushback that we'll get is, my kids are, and then there's some sort of deficit-based data point about how far they are from where they should be academically, and I don't have time for this because I have to do, and usually it's in the language of remediation, and so I want to share how these things are connected because I think it's important, so you can see kind of what evidence we're collecting as we measure impact. So I mentioned that, it's a sort of comprehensive school change model. So we have this pedagogical framework that is rooted in this research base. We have a whole kind of liberatory data approach where we're centering students' experiences and then triangulating that with outcome data in a lot of different ways. And so looking at process measures, outcome measures, and balance measures. And then there's this like inclusive change component where we really believe that, I shouldn't be going into a community and telling people what to do. It really has to be authentic to, and they should be driving the change, and we're supporting them with the research base and the tools and the training that they need to be able to create this vision that they're the ones who establish. So this is just one school that I wanted to share that's in New York that we work with. And so our coaches are developing the professional development scope and sequence that's based in what the design team establishes as a vision that's based in their data. Okay, and it all comes from this culturally responsive framework and comes from this research base. This is where you see over here the teachers so this is the math median test percentiles. Folks who got coaching are in blue. Folks this is the MAP assessment from fall, winter, spring. coaching, folks who didn't get coaching. And so you'll see, as much as I don't want to always just validate outcome data, it is important to note that that these things can be connected sometimes, and they inform one another. And so even if it is not the end all be all, those data points are important for us. This is, again, folks who met their projected growth at a school where 100% of the kids qualify for free and reduced lunch. 90-something percent of the kids identify as Black and or Latinx, and the scores, kind of when we came in and started working with the school, were pretty low, and we started to see that the educators who got coached, and it's not necessarily educators who are the strongest educators, and this is in a third year of implementation, a higher percent of them, their students met their projected growth compared to educators who didn't get coached in this way. And then you'll see for multilingual learners, and this was a school where they really saw some challenges around the experiences for multilingual learners. The text here is really small. I'm apologizing in advance. So I'll just narrate kind of what's on this slide. We have a survey tool where we actually ask students to reflect on their perceptions of these culturally responsive practices in the classroom. So everything that's in this research base, we want to know, do students feel like these things are happening? And then what we do is we can then triangulate that experience data and their perceptions of these practices with outcome data. And start to see, okay, what's actually happening. And so you see here, for example, so we have, these are questions, I'll read the questions to you here. I feel like an important member of this classroom. In this class, my classmates help me when I need help. The different students get along. My teacher's glad that I'm their student. Students put a lot of effort in their work. This is just within sort of some of the questions within one domain. There are also questions about their academic mindset. There are questions about whether or not they have the opportunity to share things about their cultures, whether they have the opportunity to learn things from others' cultures, whether they feel that the educator and the classroom community respects, and respect it can be a tricky word, but respects, values, celebrates who they are, where they're from. And so then we can kind of disaggregate by different populations. So these are multilingual learners. These are the students who are not multilingual learners. These are the students who are multilingual learners. And so what you see is, this is on a scale of 0 to 5, 5 being the highest. Students who are not multilingual learners, their beginning survey, they gave that a 3.1. By the end of the year, it went to a 3.2. Students who were multilingual learners, that at the beginning, they rated it much lower. They rated that question a 2.7. So our multilingual learners were less likely to feel that they were an important member of the classroom, right? 2.7 compared to 3.1. However, by the end of the year, they jumped to 3.5. So surpassed the kids who are not multilingual learners. And then what we see is also then multilingual learners were actually more likely to meet their projected growth on the math assessment. And so we see that there's some alignment between this improvement in their experiences in the classroom and feeling like an important member of this classroom, and then also their likelihood to they're meeting their projected growth on the math assessment. And so we try to kind of look at the data sort of at that level of granularity. So I'm going to pause for a second just to see if I missed anything in the chat box. It looks like it's a good conversation happening here, which is awesome. Yes.
I have a question, Malika.
Yes, please.
Can you just say a little bit about what the coaching consisted of?
Yeah, absolutely. So within those 4 domains, I mentioned we start by kind of looking at data as a design team. The design team says, okay, based on this data, this is who school is working for. This is who school is not working for. This is what we need to improve. This is what we need to keep doing. They establish their vision. Then based on that vision, we share with them these practices, which I actually want to preview with you here. They are actually in the same link that you have. So when you click on this, oh, actually, this is where I want to go. Yep. And apologies if my computer's a little bit slow loading this. I know we just have a couple minutes. So the practices, pardon me as I scroll, are here. So within those 4 domains, there are a series of teacher practices and student practices. They're all research-based and they come from this research base. You know, what I shared with you is a research summary, so we can kind of consume that. But these are all of the practices. The design team identifies the specific practices that aligns to their vision, which align to their data, and then we develop a professional learning kind of scope and sequence that follows the intentionality of the 4 domains, but also takes into consideration their priorities, and then they get coaching on those specific practices. So this school was working on examining and addressing power and privilege as they show up in the classroom. That was their first one. Nurturing a culture of trust and belonging and a culture of thinking. That was from the second domain. Scaffolding and developing students' thinking skills and dispositions. That was their third one. And then supporting students to act in ways that promote justice. That was their fourth one. The fourth domain. So those were the priority practices that they wanted to focus on. And so then in this third year of implementation, we started to see that actually played a role. You see similar results for students with disabilities who had some of the lowest kind of scores in specific areas, and especially when we looked at Black boys with IEPs. And so we had to, the teachers really we have to do better in the classroom. And you started to see that happening through coaching and through that data reflection and through the strategies. And in fact, a higher percentage of them met their projected growth as well. And so I know I need to leave a couple of minutes for the survey. So we won't actually go deep on this, but maybe I'll just invite you all to share a couple of thoughts, 1 or 2 thoughts either in the chat box or, if you're willing to unmute, just to kind of think about any implications for you. And as you all are thinking around that, I will share that there are some ways to kind of get engaged and involved. And there's a survey link that is going to go into the chat box. And hopefully I left enough room for you to actually do it. But I will pause now. I'll give folks a chance to get the survey link into the chat box. And then I'll see if there are any questions or reflections before we close out. Thank you, Eva. Love that. Yes. We always try to center the students' reflections because they know their experiences best. Thank you, Elliot. Thank you, Rhonda. Yes, I will reshare the slides for anyone who did not get them.
I'm wondering if I could say something.
Yeah, please.
I know I'm on my phone. No, I just appreciated being able to read through these practices and how, again, they almost seem digestible when I think about some of the competencies that are put out there, and really honing in on like how a teacher and students can possibly, hit one of the practices and like developing this to the full extent. But I really do appreciate, as a science teacher, I'm like looking at the practices that you just read off, and that's like truly grounded in this idea of like, how do you take your development of project-based learning and essential questions and really get students to see, one, how are they going to be able to take action, but also value their education of what you're doing, because it's not just as a science teacher learning about, cells or ecosystem, but also being able to say like, how is this impacting the world? So I just wanted to appreciate that.
That just spoke to my heart as a former high school science teacher as well. So thank you, Mika. Am I pronouncing it right? Mika or Mika? Mika. Hopefully I'm pronouncing your name right.
Mika, like make a song. So, yeah.
Mika. Thank you, Mika. Love that. Thank you for that reflection. Absolutely, that's the intention. That is the goal. So thank you for that thought. Yeah, and feel free. My Twitter handle is in the session. If you want to tweet me, ask me any questions. If there are more resources that would be helpful for you, I'm happy to share any resources that we have. Always want to be a support. So reach out anytime.